Trevor, thank you for that report. Now on to take you to Maputo, Mozambique. Earlier on, we had an engagement with our very own Caroline Jenga, who is attending a conference there where the African governments are being advised to create tax policies that serve the needs of its citizens and focus on reducing reliance on external debts and broadening the tax base. Here is what Jenga had informed us earlier.
Thank you for joining us live. We're still in Maputo, Mozambique, the second day of the fourth edition of the African Debt, that is the African Conference on Debt and Development that has been organized by AfroDad. And today we've been speaking about reforms, of course, in the global architecture and also looking at the feminist lens in regards to that and also looking at the lessons we can learn from trade and tax policies. And to just expound more on that, I am joined by Dr. Leila Latif, who is the University of Nairobi Committee on Fiscal Studies, just to expound more on tax policies and also how we can navigate the revenue collection space and also see how we can ensure that we are taxing more on the wealthy individuals and also look at how we can ensure that the corporate tax goes up instead of the income tax. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Leila. Maybe we can start from the conversation that we've been having right now on the feminist approach on, of course, the global architecture and also lessons learned from trade and tax policies.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for having me. It's so great to be here. Hello, everybody. So I think the conversation is really important going forward in terms of determining what role does trade and tax play in the formation of the global tax infrastructure or the global financial architecture. There's a lot that's going on at the international level that has a direct impact on the economic well-being and improvement of living standards of women. And tax and trade plays a huge role in that, right? So what basically means, and I'll give it to you in the form of an example, right? We have statistics from the World Customs Organization that simply says that 74% of trade that takes place cross-border in Central and Eastern and Southern Africa is led by women. Right? So, and on top of that, we only have like about 23% of deployment of custom officers who are women. So we're already seeing that more women are doing cross-border activities, but very little women or a very small bucket of women are right there that are, manning the customs borders for the facilitation of these women so they're not exploited. Now, one thing is that we need to look at the World Trade Organization. They have this agreement on agriculture whereby they say that every African country or every developing country has to liberalize its market so that there's open market and there's free flow of trade. On the face of it, that seems very good for women because if you have open markets, you don't really need a visa to go into another country to buy goods from there and then ship them back to your country, right? But it's a bigger problem because when you're looking at the agricultural sector, right, 43% of the agricultural sector, the labor force are women, and many of them are in the informal sector or they're part of small-scale entrepreneurs. When you open up the entire trade market as liberal, as open markets, you're bringing in highly subsidized products from developed nations into Kenya and other African countries. So these women in the local sectors, right, they're not able to compete competitively with these cheap imports. So what happens is that they're driven out of the market. So in as much as we have at the global level, the International Financial Institution in the form of the WTO, talking about open markets, it's not working to the advantage of local African women because they're being hounded out by these big corporates, right? What does that do to the tax scheme? So these women cannot earn a revenue. They can't earn an income. That means they can't pay taxes. If they can't pay taxes, government can't collect adequate sources of revenue to finance development going forward. What then happens? We then have to look at debt. And debt keeps mounting. When you have more debt, you come up with austerity measures. Who are the people who are going to be impacted with these austerity measures in the first place?
And Dr. Leila, it's a broad subject and we can speak a lot about it, but I'd just like to touch base on how can Africa widen the tax net and also ensure that maybe the wealthy individuals are taxed more. And also there's something you mentioned as you're giving your submission, you talked about how African governments are generating more from income tax rather than from corporate tax. Yeah.
Super, that's a fantastic question. The Africa Outlook report has always shown us data for Africa from the 2000s up till now. The way in which Africa generates revenue is more from income tax rather than corporate tax. It's always like a higher percentage of income, lower from corporate income tax. So then the question is, how do we think about mobilizing more revenue to support our development? And that's the beautiful thing that you mentioned, is the wealthy. Who are the wealthy in the country? How do we define the wealth base? Right now we speak about capital gains tax, and we say capital gains tax is a form of taxing wealth. It's not really a form of wealth taxation. Data from the World Inequality Lab tells us that you have like 10% of the wealthy in Kenya hold 40% of national income. That's a huge disparity. So we've got to start thinking about the taxation of the wealthy. We've got $7,200 millionaires in Kenya. We need to figure out, how do we design a wealth tax system that's going to tax their net worth, and that net worth would now be helpful in expanding and broadening our tax-based structure so that we result in more revenue resources rather than putting the fiscal pressure on common mwananchi like you and I.
I know it's a broad subject and I will speak more about this, but just to let Dr. Leila go, I would like to speak on maybe the size of why we're taxing more, or rather why we're collecting more revenue on income tax and less on corporate tax. Kenya, of course, has a large working population. Of course, the income tax, which is commonly known as the payee, is deducted directly from employees. And also, we'll look at why the corporate tax evasion. And of course, some of the registered corporations underreport profits or engage in tax avoidance strategies, leading to lower corporate tax revenues. I know this is a broad subject, and this is something I will explore during the 9 p.m. bulletin. But as for now, I'll take you back in studio.